I always like doing that.
Yes.
Good.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully, this is all working. Let us know if it is or isn't, please. Welcome to our Anchor open source live stream. We do this every Thursday, pretty much. I'm Alan. The team are either side of me. Dan is there, and Will, and Keith, and Alex are over the other side. I don't know how Zoom decides to do this. It seems semi-random in some ways. We're the people who work on Syft and Grype, the container security tools, and a whole bunch of other stuff as well. And we go through issues and deal with questions and all kinds of stuff on this stream. If you have any questions, ask away. You'll find out everything you need to know about Anchor and the open source tools at anchor.com/open source. And you'll also find all the Git repos on github.com/anchor. Finally, we have Discourse, which the easy way to get to is anchor.com/discourse. And you head there, you'll find discussions, a place to ask questions, but also the announcement for this session. So, surprise, guys. My usual table down the bottom here has a few needs discussions. I don't know how many of these we've gone through before. So should we just pile in and see how we go?
Let's do it.
Let's do it indeed. So, do we want to talk about false positives? That is tagged as a needs discussion.
I take that as a needs discussion. It's interesting because this is a Python package that switched from numbering by like year, point, month, point, day releases to semver releases. And so when Grype runs the version comparison, it decides that version 17.5.3 is a lot less than version 2020.7.4. And so it marks it as vulnerable for and I wasn't sure. That seemed like an unusual class of false positive. And so that's why I put needs discussion on it. We don't have to discuss it, but it's not just it strikes me as an interesting class of false positive. I'm not sure there's anything we can do, but
yeah, I mean the fun thing about so for some ecosystems there's that notion of epoch or epoch where you can say, oh, I've got some version lineage and another version lineage and they can't be compared. And for the pip ecosystem, there is no equivalent. Someone correct me if I'm wrong on that. But I don't know of anything where you could say like this version from the past and this bucket can't be compared with the version of the future. So there's nothing that immediately stands out for this ecosystem as to what to do about it. Especially on the catalog side, like what can Syft do to make Grype just kind of just work, and that's where I kind of draw a blank.
I mean, it would seem to me that if we could tell on a per package basis that there were two different types of versions used with some sort of a like priority order or something like that, you could potentially say, okay, I've got this, this thing at this particular version. I've got a whole bunch of other versions, and then have like some series of comparators that know whether they're looking at the same thing or different things. You know what I mean? And so, like, if they're looking at the same thing, they could say, oh, this is a year-based version, only compare with other year-based versions, or something like that. And so you could sort of like omit some of the matches and then have like two different things potentially looking. I don't know, it would be fairly complicated, and you would probably need to be very specific about this package has this specific behavior that uses multiple types of comparisons. Like you wouldn't want to do that in a blanket way across a whole bunch of ecosystems or anything.
right. But it's also hard because like the fact that Cinder switched from date-based versioning to semver-based versioning in that order is not really written down anywhere Grype has access to. Right. Like that, I think that's the real trick. Because you could just as easily decide you're sick of Semver and then switch to date-based ordering, which I guess unless you've gone up into like, 2000 major versions is like that'll be okay. So I guess it's only the reverse order that trips us up. But yeah, I wonder that this is one of the places where like if we had an extra database of information that isn't in the SBOM and isn't a vulnerability, this is one of the things I would put in it. But maybe it makes sense to stop discussing it now and say like this, like we would need to like get the version history from PyPy and like compare position in the list or something to handle cases like this. Because really like the fact that, you know, 2015.7.1 was released before 17.5.2 is like a historical fact, right? It's not like we're not going to logic our way out of it at runtime. It's information that we need to have to write down somewhere. So
Do we have
maybe not as much.
a set of quirks for things like this? Like do we have like a place for the weird things that you probably programmatically wouldn't want to cater for because they're so ludicrously rare, in some way?
Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting idea. Would it make sense to have a label called like needs more data? Like like we have like needs discussion and needs investigation, and there's one that like I don't know how we'd phrase it, but that means not solvable with the data sources presently available to Syft and Grype at runtime. Like,
Well, I more
mean,
meant like quirks. Like, is there a part of Syft or Grype that we could, like, a way we could describe this is a quirk that we have to have a special case for because they're so rare.
oh,
That's what I meant.
you mean like where we document weird matching edge cases? Is that what you mean? I don't
Well,
understand what you're asking.
I'm asking, like, how often does this happen? Probably not very often. I don't know how often people go in this direction with their versioning. Is it something where Grype could know that this specific package, like a lookup table, like a set of quirks inside of Grype that says, if you find this, we know that's greater than that and not that greater than that the other way around?
We haven't we've
also-
done that. Go ahead, sorry, Dan.
I think probably the most relevant area right now, correct me if I'm wrong, would be the place where we could correct some identifier information to deal with false positives, right? Which is kind of what this is. I mean, it would be maybe possible to like encode a bunch of stuff. The problem here is that there's a little piece of logic in here, right? Like these version strings are all less than these version strings and later, and they're in different formats, right? So I don't think there's like a general, logical quirks area of Grype, because I'm not sure where that would go, because these things are so unique. That's like, well, that would be a quirk in this part of the code, and some other edge case would be a quirk over there in this other part of the code.
An interesting
It's an interesting
idea.
question to ask if there's a way to actually modify the data to smooth this out in a quirky way, which I think there might be.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. If we had a way of like writing down like one of the things we could do is like we could just say the version history of a package is a string list, and we could have a version comparator that's just position in the string list. And so then we could have like a list of special packages where at runtime we put or where like when we're building the Grype database we have like a version lookup table, so we have a string that means so in other words we have a table that means this package has a goofy version history and here's the list of all known versions, and then Grype can look in that table at runtime and find Cinder and decide that, oh look, for the purposes of Cinder 2015 is less than 17. That might be possible. I think we've done some things like that in the past. Like one of the things that sort of reminds me of is the like artifact ID to group ID map in the Java cataloger, right? There are some times where like the group ID Maven Central uses for a jar isn't actually present in like the POM properties or anything. And so there's like a lookup table in Syft source code where we try to compensate for that. But that's sort of like admittedly a workaround. So yeah, I think one of the other things we have if we want to generate that is we want to source for this data. Right. And so we would end up having to like go and look either at the the sort of tags in the source repository, assuming that's what they do, or look at the history of the PyPy package, assuming it goes back far enough. Um, when I was looking at this, I had a look at the PyPy package, and PyPy doesn't list versions old enough. Um,
Well, I mean, one thing we could do, I think, and I kind of was on the same page as Dan, which is this seems like something that if we had a simple way to correct with some data that we could, augment things here. And so, I mean, we have like the version format, right? And
yeah,
we
but,
could
well,
potentially like tag these like certain types of things with a specific type of format that we say explicitly, you're
yeah.
gonna see, this mix of a couple things and, do this behavior because of it.
We could also look at what the first Sembear style version they released is and put like one before that plus 2014 in the vulnerability. So we put a vuln config that says like, or a grepdb config that says like, when I'm doing GHSA Pythons, here are
Well,
packages that are known to have switched. Like, here's a list of packages and the first semver after all the date-based versions. And then we just do like 0 plus 0, 0.0.0 plus date for all previous versions. And then Grype's version comparison would work. But
Which is,
anyway,
it's interesting. It's almost going back to what Alex is saying. Like, would there be operational problems, you guys think, if we actually just imposed an epoch concept over special cased, package version strings like this?
yeah, that's an
We
interesting.
have support
Yeah.
for epoch handling for ecosystems that actually support and use epochs, but and that's what this is, right? I mean, it might be an interesting way to say like, hey, for Cinder, we're going to use epoch or 0 : right? And then the old version of type, and then 1 : for the new, and then maybe there's a way to pitch that together downstream of that in the code.
Yeah. Well, and that would be easy. That would be an easy Grype change too. And then what you'd need to do is like you'd have to tell grepedb like in a config file for this package, this is the first version of the new epoch. And or something, right? Like that's the thing that's still
that might be the quirk type subsystem idea that you're talking about, Alan. Like
yeah.
impose epoch on top of packages that are changing version schemes. I think it's an interesting way to phrase this.
I mean, we could literally just encode that in the version constraints that we have directly.
Right.
And yeah.
So I think that's also nice because it keeps it out of doing weird things at runtime and just writes a database that's going to work for Grype. We might need to also special case it on the presentation, because if somebody says like, oh, this, Grype hallucinated version 0 2015 7.5 of Cinder, I can see that bug report coming in. So we might want to trim the prefixes back. And then we'll get questions where people are like, how come 2015 is less than 8? But
invisible epoch, I think, should be the name of this concept.
Okay. So
invisible epoch.
I think that's probably the best idea. We're gonna like. I'd be interested in talking about another thing. I think invisible epoch is a pretty cool idea for how to solve this, and a pretty good name, a pretty good band name for our side
that's
project.
my skiffle band name is invisible epoch. Okay, should we move on? There's nothing else to add other than what we have here, I guess, on the issue.
I think Is there like maybe Alex could edit the comment to say like we could try to configure GrypeDB to init an invisible epoch for certain packages or something? Like I don't want to lose that idea, and I don't see it written down.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote that before while we
Yeah,
were
yeah,
still discussing, so I'll edit it to talk about the
cool.
kind of dev nodes like GrypeDB can do this work for us. So
Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Next. This one. Did someone tag this one? Have we talked about this before?
we talked about this last week, I believe, and
I think we did, yeah.
yeah. So
Okay.
I think the action item is for everybody to go try different CLI user experiences for customizing the metadata, and yeah.
How about that one?
I think I got one.
Okay. Which one? Do you want?
3345 and Syft. It's on this list here. There it is. Support file ownership. So this is actually so I was just looking at it a few minutes ago. It's a dupe. Well, it's not dupe. It's really a more specific example of another existing one. If you head down to the bottom, there's a comment. I just it's really 3213. Yeah. So, which is like, okay, if you point Syft at some like really small scope of, so in this particular example that they gave on 3345, it's like they do a file scan of varlib dpackage, or sorry, varlib dpackage status, like the file itself. And like our cataloger will be oblivious to everything else in that dpackage directory, even though it's technically referenceable. Like we could have had allowed the cataloger to go and reference the info, package name dot MD5 sums file to get the list of files and the checksums, etc. But that's not possible here because the user provided a single file as input to Syft. And this is where, like, and so this has come up in like a few different ways on 3213, which is like, well, okay, we will have like a search scope and we have some larger like referencing scope. And we might have actually already talked about this in a live stream several weeks back, but I want to double click further in terms of like, how do we imagine something like this would work? Both from like a user perspective, like what would be the reference scope? Is it just allowed anything on the system? But then also with like, how would this work when we talk about at the lowest levels, like with the catalogers use file resolvers, the file resolvers use locations. Locations are indexed from somewhere. So I'm kind of curious about both of those at the same time. So I'll pause there and say, let that simmer for a little bit.
I don't fully understand. Like, the user specifically pointed to a file, and you're saying you want to go up from there to the directory level and scan from there downwards.
Well, yeah, because like another way of saying it, like Alex, correct me if this is not quite right, but it's kind of distinguishing between like, here's all of my material / on the server, but tell me about RPMs. Or like, here's all my material. Tell me about home NERMI, my Python project, requirements.txt.
Yeah.
There's a perspective here that's like, Syft has access to the entire universe of material, but what I want to see from it is just something inside of it. And some of the catalogers might need to go outside of the specific thing you're pointed at in order to get the information from the global corpus of material. And right now, the tools are kind of like point and shoot. You point it at this directory, and it's like, I'm going to use what is in that directory and beneath that directory, not above it, right? To figure out what's in it.
That makes sense. So
is that kind of accurate to sort of describe this? Yeah.
Yeah. The one extra thing I'll add to that is that I think there's a performance aspect here where, somebody doing a scan against root, or it's a motivation for it, I'll say. Like someone doing a scan against root typically sitting around for a while. Whereas like if you scan specifically like var lib dpackage status, is like it's lightning quick, and it's not a perfect example here because like practically like scanning var lib dpackage is pretty fast. So I'm kind of wondering if this is a practical example that they're giving, or if it's just say, hey, did you know this is the that the behavior is different here. But I think there's some performance aspect that falls into this too. Why people do these like these particular very specific searches like this.
Well, and one of the reasons I think is because if they try to scan the narrow scope of a thing, but it doesn't have the OS release in it, they don't get distro information, and then all of a sudden matching downstream is hard. And so like at the very least, a lot of people I think want to go outside what they can to get that populated.
Yeah.
And I guess like you did ask before about like how do we kind of like see this working? And it's like kind of a hard question to answer because like where do you draw a line between like what files are available where, and how do you make it easy to understand? And at first I was thinking, oh well, maybe like glob searches only resolve from one thing, right? So like we index a thing and that's the thing you can search through. But there are other things that we sort of do glob searches with that we might want to go outside also. So that kind of like falls apart there.
Yeah, I mean, like, so far the only other. I mean, like, what I have as an example here on the screen, like this, Syft pointed at some subdirectory and then referenced something above it. I'm actually not a fan of this suggestion that I have here because this suggestion means the user A needs to reference that specific additional scope. And you need to know the consequences of that. And like a good example is like, so Keith, you were pointing out, well, folks want to have that extra reference of like the etc.os release, but most folks don't know that etc.os release is what you want. So you don't know what dash reference should have /etc.
I feel like it's more of a, like if you think of like wget, the -m, which is like mirror, and it will just mirror an entire folder, but there's the -- no parent. So it will go up folders and like spider the whole site if you don't tell it not to. And it feels like this is a thing that should be on by default to allow Syft to do the optimal thing it can do, which is go and get the right metadata from all over the place that it needs. But if you don't want it to do that, you say -- no parent or -- lock it to the folder rather than the way around you've got it here, where you as the user have to know where it gets that extra metadata from. I agree with you there.
So let's talk about like some specific examples. So it sounds like what like right now, sort of the scope of the file system Syft considers and the scope of the file system that the user is interested in knowing about right now have to be congruent. There's not really a lot of way to, like, you can do -- exclude all over the place to sort of shrink them, and I think honestly shrink them both. But like, so one of the examples you had is like, right, I'm scanning my project, right? Like I have a bunch of work in like a file tree, and I want an SBOM for one project, but like I want to tell Syft that it's allowed to sort of climb out of the file tree and like look at, like, if I say like, this package depends on ... / my other package, that Syft should be able to go look in there to see if there's version information or something. So let's try to think of some. I think for trying to understand this, I always like motivating examples as a way of trying to understand like how to build a thing, because it's otherwise the discussion is too abstract. So like, why do people want to do this?
Well,
I can think of one pretty concrete example. So like, let's say you have a multi-module Java project, one of which is a WAR file that's the web application. that's the thing that you send to all your customers, let's say. And so, but you have a bunch of different other things. And so if you scan the root of it, you get this like big bunch of stuff. But really what you want to do is specifically scan your WAR project. And you have a parent that's like in a sibling directory or in a root directory outside of what you actually want to start as the like the root of the thing that you want to scan. And so you want to say like basically like kind of in the example, lop a directory off so you have access to all of this stuff up one, so you can resolve some relative paths, outside of that main thing that you scan. So that's like one specific example I can think of.
Yeah, it's tricky because like you know the structure of your source. Like I've pointed at a folder that's got like some code in it, and it can't find anything. But the directory above is where there's like a Python requirements.txt and a whole bunch of other stuff that it can like figure out. And I would almost certainly point at the folder that worked because I know that's like where actually the top level of my project is. I don't know if I scanned further up here in the tree, then it would find a whole boatload of stuff. And yeah. Are there examples in these related issues?
That Maven one was, I believe, mirrors what Keith said. It's not exactly the same, but I think it's the same.
Yeah, I think that's probably, yeah, probably about the same thing.
The only other one I can kind of think of, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like the server scan. It's not source code or whatever. It's I'm on a server. What I really want to see is like what's installed on this computer, right? Or whatever I'm logged into with SSH. So your options right now are to do things like Syft /, right? That is going to give you a lot of stuff, especially if it's like, hey, you might have some stuff at home. That stuff isn't really installed, It's like source code repos I'm working on and like some caches or whatever. Your option right now is to try to get like an efficient / installed system scan is you have to work with excludes. You start with everything and then you just start excluding things until you kind of get down to what you want, which is a little awkward because like as soon as somebody adds something else, then it's going to pop up again. You have to add that to the exclude. Whereas really what you're after is like, I need to see what the Debian packages are, and I need to see if, what Node.js stuff is installed in /opt. And, there's something weird over there and, that was installed with configure, make install, That's the only other one I can kind of think of. It's an awkward flow to just keep adding excludes until you get down to what you're looking for.
Yeah.
How do you use
That's
this?
why I like
I want to exclude the home folder.
So then you're gonna, it needs to be like relative to like where you're at. So where are you?
Okay,
You're in
so just
root,
that.
so yeah. And it's like, so this reminds me of another fun aspect of this. It's okay. So this is where what I'm about to mention kind of double clicks away from the motivating use cases part, Will, your question, and more into like what are the tricky parts that would go into this. One of the decisions and how locations are represented in the directory resolver are that the directory you're at is considered to be root, or the directory give it. So like in your example, well, okay, your example is not that good actually because it's root. But say you were pointing at like home somewhere or something, and so the locations that show up in the SBOM are, it doesn't say /home /somewhere /something and then things. It because we don't want the SBOM to leak stuff about the system that it's on or where you happen to run the scan. it's relative to the directory we gave it. So an example is like if I clone a Git repo in one spot versus another, and I run Syft in both of those locations against the same Git repo with the same commit, I should get the same SBOM. And if we didn't do something like make certain we didn't have that absolute path, you wouldn't get the same SBOM. So we actually say if you're running, if you're cataloging, say a Git repo and there's a requirements txt, we surface that location as not requirements txt. We treat it as if it's the root of a file system. So we say it's slash requirements.txt. This is where I think we're going to run into the first complication, because we're going to want to convey now like a mix of like roots of the tree. So we're saying like the scan root of the tree is in this like user's home directory that's like some Git repo, and we want to convey that as to be root for everything we raise up. But we're also on a system where we wanted to get /etc/os release. Well, okay, we have a problem. If I see in the SBOM /etc/os release, is that a file that was in that Git repo that I scan it by my scan root, or is that like the actual root on the system? I don't think there's a way to portray this nicely without having to give up on some of that behavior that's there in the directory resolver today and how we convey paths in this sense. So it's like just another layer to this. So
Could I ask a question? If we implemented an include, which is the opposite of the exclude, would that solve the problem for this original ask in a way that everybody would be happy about?
can you describe how it would work?
Well, so let's say this person, I think they're just scanning their RPMs in a specific subfolder. And for whatever reason, it's slow to do the slash scan. So they scan slash, say, include my RPMs, include etc OS release, and then wait for it to scan and give me something. Would that work to like solve the problem that they have, that it's slow to scan the whole thing and be satisfactory, or is there something more that it would need to do?
That's kind of the same suggestion with the dash reference here. You have like dash reference, and I like the dash include as a better name. Side note, like that's like tremendously better than dash reference. But it also it doesn't solve that problem of like what is root or what is slash in the SBOM anymore, because it used to mean the scan root. But like, how do I say that I've got something that's sitting somewhere else?
Well, so the suggestion would be that they would still scan slash.
Oh, okay.
That would be their scan route, like that, and then they would additionally specify the includes, which is just like a opposite of an excludes.
So then,
So
I don't
like that with, but only include
But-
like var lib dpackage and etc whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
But what does that mean? Like, if Syft is pointed at the root of the file system, it's already going to walk down the whole file system. So what does dash dash the dash dash include really means exclude everything else.
I think there's an implied
Okay.
excludes ***. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. That's not like that's. I think that's hard to tease out of this, but it is. I think what it would imply.
Yeah. That'd be.
I mean, isn't that like it's effectively that, like, if you could do that, if you could give it a okay, maybe a comma separated list or whatever it is, it's a list of directories you want it to scan, and this doesn't this is an absolute path, therefore it's off the root. So that's exactly the same, but with fewer key presses and specifically saying which folders you want to do, and without saying I want to do root, but I don't want to do everything. I only want to do these things.
Yeah.
It's effectively that.
I do like I mean, so I think this is the same, yeah, as Keith, what you're saying. And this makes sense to me as like a user. And I'm going to be nitpicky. I'm going to throw in more things like the reason why we're throwing in Etsy here is because we know Etsy OS releases in there. And like, I kind of want a way to say, like, we always throw in that stuff, or we like, I don't have a way to, I don't have any other suggestions about what that would look
Well,
like.
yeah, I was actually gonna go one step in that direction as well, Alex, which is like, okay, this works for somebody doing it on this specific system, but if I wanted to craft a command that was like, I just need to see the OS packages, I'm throwing it in my automation. You'd need to account for RPM-based systems and Alpine-based systems and Deb. Suddenly your command, I think, starts to get a little weird, and it kind of requires some knowledge. I'm sort of wondering if this is context that can be attached to the cataloger level. Like this cataloger requires this external data, no matter what you point at. And then you can modify those, like the corpus of data you have access to is distinct from what it is you're scanning, maybe attached at the cataloger level and allow people to annotate those for the Maven case. I just wonder about that.
Something that we have to so like, yeah. I this is something that we've kind of talked about before, but not really. I'm gonna try to remember that part of that conversation from way back when, and raise it up here because I think I agree. It's my short like response to what you're saying.
I thought you might have been in that direction because you're saying like Etsy should just always be part of it, but you know, because we know it's needed for things like depackage cataloger, and that's how we figure out what distro and all that stuff.
It does feel like it should just do the right thing. Like,
yeah. The blocker last time that came up was all the catalogers are in terms of these double star globs. In other words, like we actually don't assume we know where the status file is. We know that it's like, within dpackage / status. And this is true with everything. Like nothing has an absolute path.
Right. There's
a
couple.
And there's some, and we could start pairing these things together, meaning like we could start saying, I have an optional pair of information, one being a glob, and one being a common path that you'll find it at. So we would need to restructure our catalogers to be able to not just take glob, but to take glob with like norm paths or something, such that we can ask the cataloger, what is the typical path that you would usually find the stuff on? Add that, and then be able to search, like make certain that's added to the index. And the downside is that you might miss stuff if you're in a non-standard spot. But that would have the auto magical feature of it just works. It would be faster than what we're doing today.
I've missed something here. Is there so let's say I scan the MITRE project. That's the root of the thing that I care about, but I also want to include etc/release. Are we saying that would be just surfaced from a cataloger to always include that?
Essentially. So like some subset of catalogers have some absolute references. So like Python catalogers don't have any absolute references. Like it's just, PyProject TOMLs and requirements TXTs. Like, so those are always double star globs. There's no absolute path to really know anything about. So those always will remain double star globs. But there are some catalogers where we do have a pretty good idea that these live in an absolute path. Now we can't change the globs. Like, we still need to be able to say like, well, when you're in a non-standard state, like this is the globs are how you find it. But if we pair those with like, I have this glob and it tends to be in this location or these set of locations. If I have my set of like, 30 catalogers or whatever that I'm using, like we should be able to ask, before we start indexing, what are the catalogers that are enabled? From those catalogers, please give me the the typical paths that you would need to operate within. And those automatically get added to the index during indexing, unless we've been told to ignore it explicitly. So then you kind of get the best of both worlds. You can say, ask Syft to scan something in some subdirectory, but then automatically add all these other paths that the catalogers would tend to find. I think the downside being is I don't know if all of those paths should automatically be added. Like, I think it'd be very surprising if I point Syft at like a subdirectory, like, you know, some git clone, and then it magically finds like D packages out in like your D package status directory. Like, that would be very surprising. So something's got to get figured out there.
Right, exactly. That's kind of where I was going. I also just wanted to point out another wrench is the base directory. So like then what happens if that one's set, if with like multiple arguments, and like it seems like it could get pretty tricky, whereas at least the include thing seems like, yeah, well, certainly not necessarily the best idea, like fairly obvious if you know how the exclude works already.
Yeah, I think for the that include approach. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't know. There's something to be said about, like, you know, when you have multiple roots in the tree you're indexing, like what is going to be like what is your S-file going to be referencing as like quote unquote root?
Right. And the other thing is that like including some other directories kind of automagically, like that doesn't necessarily solve I need the parent directory for my Maven stuff. Like then do we just always include parent directory? Like, well then let's just include the whole drive or something. I don't know. Like it seems like there are plenty of cases where that's not what somebody would want.
Well, wait, what if we interesting. What about this? What if we gave the cataloger not just the API for the file? So that today we give the catalogers the file resolver, a way to say, like, search against my index to go get files. But what if we gave the catalogers a way to expand the index as well? So like ad hoc, please go expand the index to include these other things that you weren't considering on the way in.
I think that's exactly the right solution. And I'll tell you, the other thing that would help with is nested archives, because you could sort of have something and say, here, you know, I found a nested archive I actually want to go and scan because I've identified it as something that's important to do that with. Add this to the index and continue on.
This is an interesting path. Because like there's even a path in Syft 1.0 to achieve this. We can smuggle that interface through the file resolver. All right, so I mean, maybe like this is like we've gone far enough for this discussion. I don't know if anyone wants to keep talking about this or have other perspectives, but like I can capture some notes otherwise on this.
Groovy. Nice one. Right. We have some more. I think this is one we were talking about earlier. Is that one you want to talk about this week, Keith? Or
This is the one we talked about last week with we talked about this one. It was last week.
False positive. I think we've already talked about that one, haven't we? The util Linux one, I think.
This was, I think we did talk about this one, is like related to the source.
Oh, because of the way they package it, right? So it was marked for further discussion because we've had responses from them. Do you want to take another look at this, or is this too much for the next 10 minutes or so?
I don't know if I have any particular context on this one. So
Yeah, I think this may have been discussed with about this amount of information on it last time. Um, or not the immediately previous time, but I think we've talked about it. Yeah, so this one might not be a good catch at the
Okay.
end one. It definitely needs to be moved forward, but
Are there any that have got new ones?
the normal and builder requirements is interesting because we see it with a lot of our like I think we also have the same request for like the Java dependency cataloger and the npm cataloger to like have a switch where the user can say test dependencies don't count. I don't want them in the SBOM, or like like some sort of like non production dependencies don't count. I don't want them in the SBOM.
That's
Um,
in for NPM now.
in for npm, that's awesome. So maybe there's not a ton to discuss, but it's like it's just another example of it. So
It is. I mean, we just need to come up with some sort of um, a generic way to configure all of them consistently. Um, but that's not something we need to do immediately. Just once we start to having like 3 or 4 of these different things, and we want to have a way to say like, give me all the test dependencies, or always give me all the dependencies for everything. Like maybe somebody wants that. We just like one flag that they could say like dependency types star or something, whatever that solution is. That was like the last remaining thing here.
So maybe not this one then.
There you go, that one.
Anyone got one they do want to look at? Or are we exhausted from half an hour talking about the previous one? Is that the reason why?
We could always just do the old roulette script. I haven't had a
man.
good roulette one pop up.
You want a roulette one to pop up? Okay. You don't want to pick any of them. Then I've got one here from 2 years ago. If you want to see this, false positive in Logstash from 2 years ago. Is this still a thing? Do we think?
Hey, well, this is
yeah,
fun to test.
I think it might be. I don't know. Do they say anything besides this list? I'm not getting a lot from the list.
Oh, it's because they're gem spec files. Okay.
Yeah, I think. Are there any comments from us on here? Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, I haven't heard Sparkle Motion forever. I mean, this one is this one's a solid like needs investigation, less of a needs discussion. So
Yeah, it looks like I did a lot of investigation like a year ago. Um, I think one of the things that is an interesting quirk of the Ruby ecosystem is that because like Ruby gems very often have native extensions, right? Like if you bundle install Nokogiri, then you will spend a lot of time watching libxml compile, right? Because it's native extensions. But then if you're in JRuby land, there aren't native extensions in the sense of C libraries. There are native extensions in the sense of jars. And this kind of trips us up a little bit with a few edge cases. Like, for example, like I think the Nokogiri, like one of the Nokogiri false positives on there is a vulnerability in the C code that's distributed as a native extension of Nokogiri, the gem. But if you're in JRuby, there isn't a vulnerability in the C code. Because there isn't the C code. And there might be like a nokogiri.jar that Syft raises up as a right, like that nokogiri.jar. So I think some of this, yeah, I guess this needs investigation. Nate, yeah, but so I don't know. Maybe it just needs somebody to dig into it some more. But they'll like, yeah. So, Alex, were you voting to move on when you said that, or we?
Yeah, I threw another one in the chat, unless there's anything on this one we wanted to capture. So
Which
Yeah, I think
specifically
there's.
Grype 816. No. Sorry. No. The Syft 2898. Something else threw in the chat right after that. So this one got a needs discussion, and I wasn't certain if there was what discussion was needed. Like I could see like implementation paths, but like Will, you had a needs discussion, and I've got a couple things that we could chat about on it. But I wanted to start with you in case you had something specifically.
Well, we've got like
When did
5 minutes.
I add?
10 minutes. So we about yeah,
When
go for
when
it. Sorry.
when did I add needs discussion?
Um,
Did I add a comment? No, sorry. Um, Let me take a look.
I could start. I mean, if you wanted to read for a second, what context.
Yeah,
The So with Syft 1.0, we added like a lot of stability around what the source API, like that the source package, and like how that can be conveyed. And so it's extensible now. We can start adding more than just like file, directory, and image. And one that would be great, like if somebody provides a directory, we can, do a little bit of searching before we finalize what the final source type is going to be. We could say, oh, this is a Git repo, and then collect additional information like some source based cataloger, such as like here's the Git commit, here's like the tag that it's at right now, uh, and raise that up. And so this is trying to say this issue is about specifically adding a Git specific source. So we would like, if somebody's passes like dir, like we would intuit this and collect everything that you would for dir, but also extra Git information. This could additionally mean adding like a Git scheme, so you can point it at a directory, or it can intuit whether or not it's supposed to be getting it from a remote URL, which would be fun too. That's a little like out of scope, but also it could be considered part of like the same thematic work. But I'm just curious what for folks' thoughts on this one specifically, as well as any others that are like in the same vein that you'd like to see also written as issues.
I really like this for one thing, and everything you just said. So I'm just clicking the +1 on it.
Emphatic
One thing
thumbs
I
up.
would also just kind of mention is that like I don't know exactly the right thing to do, but it could be that somebody is doing a directory scan of their product and they want a specific thing to be represented as the root thing, which like maybe it's the Maven project or some other thing there. And I think obviously reading the Git stuff and using it, especially if there's nothing else there, is great. But like there could be some other things that might like be some type of configuration or something that people use to to kind of be able to fill out that part.
That's true. That's fun because it's not only. I mean, we're kind of saying we want that. If I parse that comment and like raise it up to a little higher level, we're really saying, well, yeah, if you have a directory scan, Git is one of the many plethora of possible metadata you want to capture like right next to it. Like it shouldn't be just picking one of these things. It might be like, oh, here's some good information. I'm going to attach that to the source. Oh yeah, this is a Python project. So here's what we found out identifying information for the source. We could raise that up at the top level package of the SBOM. Like, yeah, that resonates. I think the thing is that they're siblings, which is very different than what we do with metadata today. So we'll have to come up with a new thing there.
Yeah.
I like this a lot. I feel like there's, you know, if you're doing this on a regular basis of your repo, you could have an SBOM on each commit, you know, if you really wanted to, and then be tagged as such.
This is a bit of an oldie goldie. I can try to maybe get this out of the backlog. I'll try to add a little more specific comments to this one and maybe try to elevate it to the ready column and go from there.
That would be great. That's a good positive part to stop, I think, because we're coming up on the final few minutes, and I think we're done. Unless anyone else has any other comments or suggestions. That's it. Everyone keep quiet. The only comment I was going to make is, what about other source control systems? Would you add support for Subversion and Bazaar and like, what's that other one that begins with P? What's
Perforce?
Perforce, that's it.
I mean, that's the first one.
Of course. Yeah. CVS.
Actually, we should do all those first.
Yeah.
Everything except
Mercurial. Brilliant. Oh dear. I'm sorry. Brilliant. Thank you, chaps. As always, if any of you want to get involved in any of the issues we've discussed, you'll find it all on GitHub. And we welcome pull requests. We welcome issues. And if you do file issues, please give us reproducible steps. I realize that's sometimes difficult if you've got super secret stuff in a container, but if you can give a reproducible minimal image, that would be awesome. And also joining the conversation over on Discourse as well. Any final words, or should we end it there? Great. Well, we'll see you all next week. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Alan.
Cheers.
Take care.
Everybody.
Bye.